How are you?
अल्लाह का शुक्र है. आप कैसे हैं?
मैं बिल्कुल ठीक हूँ.
Firstly, thank you so much for taking your time इस call के लिए. And I used to do a lot of these webinars in the past, and then we stopped because I got a bit too busy. And as you know, in the last few months, especially, I've been running from the US to China to Saudi to Islamabad, trying to deal with this topic which we are discussing. But you are the expert, and I'm exhausted, and so I'll get your views on what's going on. IMF आज तो मैंने इनफैक्ट एक ट्वीट भी देखी है लम्सी क्लास फेलो है ना, बट उसने क्लैप किया है कि बाय बाय IMF. So it seems as if the government has already started in a celebration, strangely, on it. But Shahbaz, you are the expert. You have the ear of all the powerful people. Would love to hear your views. What's happening in Ministry of Finance and what's happening with IMF?
Are we on the record?
We are on the record. Yes, we are on the record. This is being recorded. Most of the people on the call are people who work in the financial markets in Karachi, in asset management companies, in banks, insurance companies, and private family offices. And the format is that I'll ask you a few questions, and then we'll open it up for them, and they'll write their questions on chat, and then I'll read the question to you.
So it will be in English or in Urdu?
जो मर्जी आप
Pakistanis or is there a foreigner?
No, I don't think there's anybody from outside of Pakistan.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Well, the current situation is that I don't see any chance of the IMF program getting any positive or major turn at this point in time. The 9th review, which remains pending because of so many issues. You've mentioned about one PMLN politician clapping about the IMF deal collapsing. Well, by till end of Feb, early March, I saw some kind of serious commitment on part of the government of Pakistan to revive the program and get it done. And it had taken certain measures which we didn't expect the government would take so easily, like increase in the electricity tariffs, increase in the gas prices, increase in the petroleum levy rates on the high-speed diesel, currency devaluation, what they call the market-based exchange rate, mini budget of rupees 170 billion for 4 months, almost an annual impact of about more than 500 billion. So all these steps had been taken, and there was a hope that the government was serious and would complete the IMF program, at least the 9th review. But the major conditions remain outstanding, which include the financing commitment of about $6 billion, which initially the IMF demanded at $7 billion. But because of less than expected current account deficit, the IMF agreed to reduce the limit to $6 billion till June this year. There is also another controversy, you may call it a story. I'll come to that later on about the reality of $8 billion IMF demand. But restricting to this 30th June period, there was clarity on part of the IMF, and at least I knew this fact, that the IMF would not agree to the staff level agreement until Pakistan fully arranges or make sure that the $6 billion financing commitments are there. And unlike past, in July, August last year, when these assurances had been given at the time of the executive board approval by the concerned directors from these countries, this time this IMF staff wanted to take direct commitments from these countries, and it had secured commitments from Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But still, there is a gap of $3 billion that remained unbridged as of today. Maybe there was some progress on the World Bank loan, but that did not move on. That is one condition that remains outstanding. The second issue was the petrol subsidy. It was probably unwise decision on part of the government of Pakistan, particularly the petroleum division of the Prime Minister office, that they made a plan. We didn't make any rationale even to people who are in Pakistan. And it prematurely announced the petrol subsidy, what the government calls it cross-subsidization, but even the Ministry of Finance believes that once the subsidy is given and there is shortage of funds because of any reason, the money from the budget can also be given or chip in the future. That created or further widened the mistrust between Pakistan and the IMF, because no one in the world believed that in such circumstances the government would think of giving subsidy. This issue is now partly settled because the government has assured the IMF that it would not give the fuel subsidy. Then there was issues about interest rates, because the IMF believes that the real interest rate should be positive, and the IMF benchmark is the headline inflation, future headline inflation. The government thinks that it is the core inflation, but that barometer had been changed during the period of Mr. Raza Baki, who agreed to the headline inflation benchmark. That remained an issue. And fourth issue was the import restrictions. The only major issue was the external financing gap. But from March onwards, I felt lack of commitment on part of the Ministry of Finance about reviving the IMF program. So this is the situation right now. We are in a situation where it is, one cannot completely rule out, but I don't see the IMF 9th review getting completed very soon. About the clapping by a PMLN politician, the reason that they clapped, that since the finance minister has reduced the petroleum products prices in the range of rupees 12 to rupees 30 per liter, I don't see this is a major setback to the IMF program. The reason being, the government has not reduced the taxes. The petroleum levy is still rupees 50 per liter on both the products, although on on the light diesel oil and the kerosene oil, the PL rates were already low. The 10% custom duty on these products is also there. Basically, the prices have been reduced by making adjustments against the exchange rate losses. The OGRA had worked out about 35 rupees per liter exchange rate adjustment against the petrol price. Instead of passing on, rather recovering the full 35 rupees per liter, the Ministry of Finance decided to pass on only 20.3 rupees per liter. So the gap of rupees 15 per liter is being used to reduce the prices. But still, the PL rate is rupees 50 per liter.
No, thank you for that, Shahbaz. And as you said that you felt that by March, until March, the government was very committed and seemed serious and there was a will. What changed in March? Like, why did they give up? Or do you think it was political pressure, or so they made a political decision to not go ahead with it? What changed in that time period in your view?
I would say both reasons. Although the Ministry of Finance used to blame the IMF for changing the goalposts, I didn't find any major change on part of the IMF, because the things that the IMF was pushing, like imposition of rupees 3.23 per unit electricity surcharge on the consumers to recover the debt servicing cost, is as per plan. Because when we agreed with the IMF to reduce the circular debt, not only with the IMF but also with the World Bank, that during the current financial year, the net increase in the circular debt will be rupees 75 billion. But when Pakistan and IMF negotiated in Feb, the Power Division claimed that the increase in the circular debt will be rupees 975 billion. So now you see, if against the commitment of rupees 75 billion, you are going to add at least rupees 975 billion, then IMF would definitely ask you to bring up a plan where the deficit, whether the circular debt is not increased, rather minimized. So the agreed revised plan was giving more subsidies, about rupees 335 billion, adding something into the circular debt, and also passing on the impact to the electricity consumer, including recovering the cost of the debt servicing. So that was not a goalpost change. Probably the government thought that it has lost a lot of political capital, and it wouldn't do, or it would not implement the IMF program because it had done enough. One reason. Secondly, it could not arrange the required financing, $6 billion loans that Pakistan needed. Because of these factors, and coupled with this political situation and all those, and the tough conditions that the government had to implement, it probably decided not to actively pursue the IMF negotiations, although they made attempts even as late as mid of April, when they had virtual discussions with the Middle East director of the IMF and also with the deputy managing director of the IMF. Well, finance minister pleaded to revive the program, but the answer that he got every time was, you may arrange the financing and we would revive the program. So both elements played some role.
That's very interesting because you seem, contrary to what we generally hear in the public, and certainly there'll be biases over there. You seem sympathetic to the efforts of the government. It seems as if you're suggesting that they tried, but they gave up because A, they were political pressure, but secondly also they couldn't get the 6 billion arranged, which was a pre-requirement, and they, as you in your words, you pleaded they pleaded to IMF to reduce it, but the IMF did not bulge on it. So A, will that be, and how would you rate the government's effort? Because you also hear that it was a matter of incompetence on their behalf or lack of goodwill, which created good faith effort, which created this mistrust with IMF. So I would love to hear your assessment of that. And secondly, we kept on reading in the newspapers about US coming in to support Pakistan. I think there was even a headline on your newspaper which said that it was quoting the US ambassador that we are going to help Pakistan with IMF. What happened to all of that?
Well, I'm not sympathetic to the efforts made by the Ministry of Finance. What the Ministry of Finance was looking for, it was relaxation in the conditions in implementation of the program or the revival of the bailout package. The relaxation was not there because there was no support from the US this time, unlike in 2013, 2016 program, when the US needed Pakistan in Afghanistan. This time that situation was not there. So it was like IMF asked us to play on merit, and we were not ready to play on merit. We wanted some kind of relaxations, some concession. That did not take place. Whether those efforts were genuine or not, I cannot say, but I saw the Ministry of Finance changing its mood in March. So what was your second part of the question?
What happened to the US, the promise of the US support?
That's an interesting part. The US never gave assurances that it would intervene. These were the desires or the sweet wishes of the Ministry of Finance and every finance minister, that include Mifta Ismail earlier and then Finance Minister Sagda, that the US would intervene in our favor. They were used to that kind of favors back in 2013, 2016. It's not just hearsay. One of the top diplomats of the West, I asked him whether the US help would come or not. And his reply was, that was off the record, that it is nonsense. The word that the diplomat used, nonsense. It is nonsense to expect the US to implement as if the IMF board would listen the US. So they were never there. What they asked, that the normal conversation that used to take place between the finance minister, it would like this, that please help us out. We are sincere. We have done this much. The efforts that I just counted, the measure that they took, they would recount those measures to the US ambassador, the UK ambassador, the Chinese ambassador, the US, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia ambassador, the UAE ambassador. Please help us out, bail us out. So the usual reply that every finance minister would get, I hear you. That means I've listened to you, and I would communicate to Washington or to the Treasury Department or the State Department. Probably the US never made an explicit commitment to Pakistan that it would convince the IMF to relax the conditions. So I'm again and again emphasizing on one thing, that we were seeking concession. It was not like that the US or the IMF was doing something which was not in the program. So the fault was on our part. We didn't play on merit. We were used to these concessions, and we were seeking these concessions again. That didn't take place this time because the conducive political environment, the conducive geopolitical environment was missing this time.
So you think that we failed to read that? Because there was constant news, and I know that there were constant visits by people from the State Department and the Treasury, and in the capital markets, they used to come and meet some of my colleagues who are on the call and talk about that, we will support Pakistan. And so perhaps, do you think that the government was misled by that, or do you think that they never wanted, like they never made that commitment that we will support Pakistan? Because I do remember clearly reading in Tribune, actually I was sitting in the office of the Secretary of Finance, and it was, the newspaper was on his table with the heading that, quoting the US ambassador, that we will help Pakistan with the conversation with the IMF.
So what does mean by that help? That's
yes,
important. So help means what?
Clearly,
help.
it never came, right? So we now know that.
So help means, does it mean that we'd ask the IMF to reduce the loan requirements or what? Because probably Pakistan wanted to use the US good office to get the board date and the staff level agreement. But at the same time, US this time was clear that Pakistan has to implement those conditions. So it was kind of miscalculation on part of Pakistan to expect big things from the US, particularly when just few weeks ago, Pakistan snubbed the US President, Joe Biden, when he did not participate in the Democracy Summit. So that was a big thing. So you want to get some favors, but at the same time, you're not ready to return the favors. That was also a question. Secondly, and this aspect is important, and probably government knew this and didn't give full weight to it, that there's a deep realization within the Pakistani government that Pakistan distanced itself from China during the past 4 years. And at the end of the day, it could not get any major relief from the West. Either it is in the shape of some kind of grants, loans, some concessions in the IMF conditions. That did not happen. So this time, Pakistan was not ready to listen or to implement some of the demand that probably the US was making return of its support to the IMF. So we don't know much about those demands, except to the extent of some pressure on the nuclear program, which was actually the pressure on the long-range nuclear missile, the Shaheen 3. Other than that, we do not know much about that. So somehow there was and is a realization in the Ministry of Finance, in the establishment, in the civilian setup, that during the past 4 years, we did maximum that we could to appease the West, but in return, West didn't give enough to us. So at the end of the day, government of Pakistan will have to rely on China. If the cost of reviving the IMF program is China containment, which is a political question, and probably one of the topics of, might be topic of discussions between Pakistan and the US ambassador. So if the cost of revival of the IMF program is China containment, probably Pakistan this time was not ready to pay that price.
Very interesting. So so I know there's a lot of questions which have already started. We will open up for questions in 5 or 6 minutes, because I'm also very keen to ask some questions. So Shahbaz, if you have to assign a probability of, do you think is there any probability that IMF program will come through, or do you think now there's no probability? What's the probability you'll assign to that?
So let's give it, instead of giving some marks, percentages, let's discuss the timeline. If Pakistan and the IMF agree on a staff level agreement today, it will take another minimum, let's say average, 4 weeks to call a board meeting. That's the normal process. In case of emergency, special treatment to any country, IMF can reduce this period to 2 weeks. So in normal circumstances, and we don't have any kind of cordial or lovely relation or very productive relation with the IMF right now, average time between a staff level agreement and the board meeting is 4 to 6 weeks. So today is May 17th. This program is going to end on June 30th. So even if the program is revived, a staff level agreement is signed today, we will not have a board meeting date before June 15th. So that makes less chances for the revival of the program. And more importantly, when we don't have enough finances available. So that's why I don't see very bright chances for the revival of the deal. But since if some political thing happens, Pakistan agrees to something, I do not know, you don't know at this point in time, it can be done. But completing the program, clubbing the remaining 3 reviews, 9th, 10th, and 11th, and getting the total $2.6 billion disbursed by the IMF, I don't see that will happen.
Got it. So it's water under the bridge. And so my last question, and I know people have already asked this question as well, is what's next? And so what's the plan now? And when you deal with and engage with the power corridors, what are they thinking? Are they worried? Or are they saying that, we will just, I mean, what are the politicians thinking? What are the bureaucrats thinking? Because they are going to stay on for a longer time period. So is there any plan B?
Well, one would say that it would be unwise to say that no one is worried. Finance Minister is very much worried. The bureaucracy is very much worried. What will happen next? Because our reserves, gross reserves are $4.4 billion. Our repayments, including the interest cost, is $4 billion plus in 2 months. You might get rollover of $1 billion, refinancing of another $1.3 billion, but that will have to be paid back before it is being refinanced. Very tough, very tough situation. What the politicians are thinking, what the bureaucracy is thinking. The worst thing that happened to Pakistan at this point in time, when there was economic turmoil in the country, we don't have one united, very much glued economic team. There are rifts and frictions within the Ministry of Finance. I would not go into the details. Who is against whom? Who is working for Prime Minister? Who is working for the Finance Minister? So I wouldn't divulge much about that. But our economic team is not on the same page. And one of the reasons for the differences is the IMF program, because 2 different quarters sitting in the same floor, not in the same floor, in the same building, they were thinking differently how to deal with the IMF. Do we have a plan B? I don't see any plan B except the latest strategy, policy, whatever you may like to call it, if there is one, to completely block or drastically reduce the imports only and allow the import only to the extent of which are really, really essential, like the fuel imports, some LNG, some few food imports, and save some money, because apparently the plan is that cross August, by all means, avoid default till August. How? We have monthly average inflows in shape of the exports and remittances of about $4.5 billion. So the plan was to restrict the imports in the range of below $4 billion. You have seen $3 billion according to the PBS data, $3 billion imports in April, but the SPP data yesterday showed it at $3.7 billion. That is a difference between the timelines. One is the actual payment based and the other is on the base of the GTs. So you people all know that. So the plan is save $500 million to $1 billion per month against the non-debt creating inflows and use that money to make some of the repayments. That plan worked in March, but it didn't work when you had about $500 million plus surplus current account. But this didn't help in April in a big way, because we had surplus of only $17-18 million last month. So that's the strategy right now.
What about Chinese and Saudi support? Like, can they come in, bail us out in a big way, or do you think that they didn't do it in the past, like when they were being asked by IMF for more money? So, is there any hope of a bailout by these countries?
So what the people say that Chinese are willing to help Pakistan. They had put a condition that Pakistan should bring political stability, and they would not let the default take place. We don't know much about this. What happened between our army chief and the Chinese leadership during his visit last month to China. But that political stability is not there. One thing is sure, that Chinese would not withdraw their old loans. They would keep rolling over and refinancing it. Will they give fresh loans? I don't see much chances of that. As far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, Saudi Arabia has agreed to give $2 billion, as we know that, and the federal cabinet probably has also given approval of a draft of the agreement. The deposit may come that will help to stabilize the rupee, and then help to pass through this June until August. But the problem is the big repayment requirements. Either these are the rollovers or refinancing, that's a separate thing. But on the table, on the board, the amount is in the range of $30 to $35 billion for the next financial year, depending upon the current account deficit figure that you take. So we need at least $24.5 billion to make principal repayments and also the interest payments. So it's a tough call. How the Pakistani how the countries those are friendly to Pakistan will help and bail out. It also depends on the political situation.
So tough. So two questions. What happens post August? Because all the plan seems to be till August. What do you think happens post August?
August is important because the National Assembly is going to complete its term on the 12th of August. Constitutionally speaking, the term of the government will end by that time, and there will be a caretaker. So it depends upon the caretaker setup. If the caretaker setup is for about 2 months as per the constitutional scheme, nothing much will happen because and that is the one approach. The second approach is it is better to get the caretakers deal with the IMF and negotiate a program with the IMF. That is the second approach. It depends upon the caretaker setup whether they would like to enter into a long-term arrangement, provided the mainstream political parties support that. Because what I remember in 2018, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar-led economic team wanted to enter into negotiations with the IMF. They went to the Prime Minister, the then caretaker Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister, on the advice of the then Law Minister, refused on the ground that the caretaker have a business only for 2 months, so they should not enter into any arrangement for more than that period. But if there is a caretaker setup, which is a gossip, I don't know whether it will happen or not. If the caretaker setup is for a longer period, then you may have a 1-year IMF program at least to pass through. And let's say if elections take place on time, there is a new government by end of October, early November. So that government will immediately have to negotiate with the IMF within a couple of months and get the deal done by first week of Jan. Otherwise, apparently we will default by that time if that doesn't happen.
And what do you think is the probability of IMF giving us a new program when they didn't even give us the money for the previous program?
Well, IMF never refuses to its member country. These are the conditions that determine whether we get the program. Because under the charter, we are the IMF member. We have every right. Even finance minister goes today and tells the IMF that I want a program. I said, okay, this is the draft of the condition. If you go implement it and come back to us, and we will give you the loan. IMF is even today ready to give the loan, but it has its own mindset. It has its own conditions. US definitely has a role in it. But I would not solely blame the IMF or the US. We are not working the way we should have. So that's the problem. So IMF cannot refuse. Even Esther, who is the resident rep of the IMF in Pakistan, and we had asked this question to her whether IMF would deal with the caretaker. So her reply to us was that it doesn't matter to the IMF whether it is a caretaker government or it's a coalition government. There has to be a government that needs to negotiate with the IMF, and they will give the loan.
Well, thank you, Shahbaz. The last question, and typically when we do these webinars and generally when we talk in Karachi in the financial sector, we're mainly talking as regarding our fiduciary duty for investing people's money or our own money. So we're analyzing things. We are not a decision maker. We don't influence decision, but I want to hear, because we're all Pakistanis. As a Pakistani, what do you think we can do, or what do you think people should do? Because these are exceptional and very grim situations. We have been talking about what China should do, or what we should ask Saudi, and what we should ask the US, but what can we do as private citizens?
Very simple. Don't worry about other things. Just do the job that you are doing. You are a financial market expert. Keep doing that. I'm a journalist. I'll keep reporting on the issues. My own philosophy, which may not be relevant to your topic and your question, is that keep the thing simple. And simple is as that I have been assigned by the will of Allah a particular role, which I'll keep playing. The things that I cannot influence, I'll not bother about that. Frankly speaking, we think a lot, we talk a lot, but we do little. As long as we keep doing our job, whatever it is, a financial market expert, a banker, a journalist, a politician, a finance minister, things will be okay. The problem is that we are not honestly and professionally doing our job. And right man is not at the right place.
Makes sense. So this is a Khan Sahab कहते हैं, घबराना नहीं. So don't panic, just keep on doing. So let's move on to the questions because there are a lot of questions and we have little time. I'll just read the questions. So Hassan Raza is asking, some of these questions will be repetition. Hassan Raza is asking, IMF program is in a limbo. What are the options for Pakistan? Will a new IMF loan program be negotiated now, which will take place after the election? So I suppose this question, last question is, will the country remain solvent by the next elections? So by October.
I think there are chances that we will remain solvent. We will not default by October. Why I'm saying that? Because we have reserves of about $4.5 billion. There is a commitment for $3 billion. If China timely rollovers and refinances these loans, and we get these funds from Saudi Arabia and UAE, hopefully we will not default. Nothing can be said with certainty. So many things are happening. So we are expected to remain solvent till October. We have already talked about the options. The plan right now is to just further slow down the imports, and try to save some money out of that of the inflows coming in shape of the exports and remittances. I have not heard anything other than that.
Thank you. The next question, Imran is asking that he feels that some people are saying that the government is intentionally trying to delay the IMF program in order to influence the establishment. So I suppose there are a lot of conspiracy theory going on around, but do you think this is true?
Well, I also have been hearing those kind of talks. You cannot rule it out completely. The question is whether they are doing it intentionally to undermine the establishment, to delay, or to continue in the office for a longer period, or how much longer period. Everyone knows that their term is going to, constitutionally speaking, their term is going to end on August 12th. I found it that, in my opinion, I may be wrong, they are delaying the program because of the political cost attached to it, number one. Number two, they think, and I don't know, the situation has changed during the past 1 week. The PTI, which was on offensive, is now on defensive. They think that if there is an election, the PTI may get a simple majority, if not a 2/3 majority. So why to stabilize an economy and give it to the enemy? Because we think enemy, we don't think it as a politics, and give a stable, relative terms, a stable political economy to the new government. That is also a factor, in my view, not to complete the IMF program.
No, if that's true, that would be very sad and tragic, because of course there's a duty for the government, and as you said, we should all be doing our duties, whether we are a journalist or a financiers. Moving to the next question, Hassan Raza is asking, generally when we talk about external gross financing requirement of Pakistan for the next 3 to 5 years, and as we report in the media, we always talk about the full quantum. Like, for example, you mentioned 35 billion, but this also includes the rollover. He's asking that since the amount is rolled over each year, why do we talk about the full number? Why don't we just talk about the net number?
That's a very relevant question. I had written an article for the USIP, the US Institute of Peace, and it's available on its website. And I've given the forecast for the next 3 financial years based on the numbers, inflows, the external debt numbers as of August last year, because after August, you don't see any major payment coming. So based on that, we have a repayment of $77.5 billion. That includes the interest cost. How much of it is short term, and why do we count that? For the next financial year, $24.5 billion, the total requirements of the repayments, including the debt servicing, around $14 to $15 billion is the short term. And this would keep repeating every next 3 years. Why? Because every time you have to negotiate it. It is not like that short term is not going to be repaid. Ideally, legally speaking, on both counts, we have to repay this loan. This is another aspect that Pakistan cannot make these repayments. So we expect and hope and count that these will be rolled over. But this rollover is not that simple as people think and believe. Like in case of Chinese safe deposit, every time Prime Minister of Pakistan has to write a request letter to the president of China or any other country to roll over. And then there is a whole process that takes months. And during those times, there is high period of uncertainty, number one. Number two, in case of the commercial loans, unlike the rollover, the commercial foreign loan has to be repaid, and then it comes back. Like this $1.3 billion, it has to be repaid, and it has to come back again if it is refinanced. And the repayment or returning the money by Chinese, again, it may take 1 week, it may take several months, as we have seen in during the last repayment that we made in March 2022. That money came back in June. It took 3 months. So it can happen. So there is a high level of uncertainty, and it involves a lot of negotiations. So that's why we count that money. The government of Pakistan had also assumed that the Gulf commercial banks would also refinance their loans. But all the Gulf banks have withdrawn their money. They have withdrawn their commercial loans. They didn't refinance those loans in past 1 year. So it was expectation that it will be refinanced. They didn't refinance. We know that these Gulf banks, some of them are backed by the bank government. So they didn't refinance. So we have to count them.
Wow, that's very interesting. Thank you for that. Jawad is asking that, is there any risk that now that the government has decided that they won't go into an IMF program, that they can really go off the track in the budget? Like, can they reduce interest rates or give more subsidies before the elections?
Well, Finance Minister Shahbaz as Governor State Bank of Pakistan can do that. You cannot rule out, because with all due respect, our Governor SPP is very, very weak, administratively speaking. So he listens to what the Q block says. One and two, one of the interest rate increases were surprising for the finance minister, one of the last two, because the board members, they prevailed, the member of the MPC. So the governor had to increase the rate. So let's see how the MPC behaves. Will the government give the subsidies? Will they go for expansionary fiscal policy? Yes, there is a high probability for that. We cannot rule out. The Ministry of Finance has indicated it will be 700 billion public sector development program for the next fiscal. Ahsan Iqbal as planning minister is looking for 1.2 trillion rupees. So those kinds of things may happen. On the intention of having another IMF program, I've seen a couple of Ministry of Finance documents where the finance minister has been advised to talk to the IMF for the need of a second program, but he didn't speak about the need of a second program. Rather, there was a meeting between the finance minister and executive director of the IMF, Bahadur Bejani. He represents Pakistan and along with 7 other countries on the IMF board. And this meeting happened a few days back, maybe 10 days back. And when the ED, the executive director, asked the finance minister, what are your intentions for the new program? So the finance minister gave a very diplomatic answer. We are open to discuss it. So he didn't say that we are ready to negotiate and we are eager and we want to do that. So he simply said we are open to discuss it.
Interesting. So that leads to the next question, which is from Kareem from Daud Hercules. He's asking that, given even with the IMF program, the country would have a fiscal deficit. You mentioned the numbers on what they want. So do you think there could be another round of large super tax on companies?
I've filed a story today. Rather, the story was printed today. That the government doesn't have any intention to withdraw the super tax. That includes the 10% for the 13 sectors of the economy. But that situation is as of today or as of yesterday. We don't know if the business community manages to put some pressure on the Prime Minister to at least reduce the 10% rate to 4%. That may happen. But complete elimination of the super tax, I don't see that is happening, given the tight fiscal space and the government's huge financing fiscal needs for the next fiscal year, including the political reasons, and also the high cost of debt servicing that Pakistan has to repay only in shape of the interest cost. So all those aspects don't create any room for reduction or for elimination, withdrawal of the super tax.
Interesting. And so his next question is that with higher taxation and lower subsidy on energy, what do you think will happen with inflation? Do you think it will go up from here?
So in layman's language, the inflation rate will be 21%. Average projected inflation rate is 21%, so it will reduce. So no, inflation will remain high for at least next couple of years. We don't know how the exchange rate will react. The circumstances dictate that the rupee may further get weakened. That is one aspect. That means there will be imported inflation. If there is imported inflation, it will fuel everything. You will have exchange rate, import restrictions in place. That means there will be supply shortages, there will be raw material shortages. So the circumstances don't change. Inflation will remain high. Food supply might improve because of the positive impact of the floods that followed next 2 to 3 years after the floods. The yield may increase. That can help the country. You have seen that happening in case of the wheat production, which is better than the expectation by at least 1.5 million metric tons. So that can also happen in case of other supplies, but there will be a role of oversight and monitoring that will remain weak. Overall, the inflation is expected to remain in double digits for at least 2 years.
Makes sense. And then a very important and loaded question, a lot of people in financial markets are very concerned about it, is about domestic debt restructuring. Any insights you can share? Do you think Ministry of Finance is talking about it, thinking about it? What do you think?
Well, if you ask my personal opinion, I am strongly in favor of domestic debt restructuring. It's also part of the problem, because people think that only external debt repayment is a problem. No, this domestic debt restructuring is the major issue. The total interest servicing is expected to be around rupees 7.8, 7.6 trillion the next fiscal year. That means about 7 to 7.5% of the GDP. That's a huge money. And 85% of that is going to the domestic banks and national savings, or whatever you may call it. So that has to be done. What the Ministry of Finance is thinking about this issue, yes, there are some kind of indications that at some stage the government will have to go for the debt restructuring, but finance minister is not ready for that. That's the problem. As long as Sagdar is the finance minister, I don't see debt restructuring is taking place. Now, there's a question whether the debt restructuring, which is in my view is compulsory at some point, whether it will be soft restructuring where we have the choice and the time on our side to go for the restructuring, or it will be hard restructuring. That will be when we are about to default or have defaulted, then there will be hard restructuring. That includes the domestic debt.
Thank you. Nihal is asking, what's the best source to get data on these loans, the rollovers, repayment terms, etc.?
The Ministry of Economic Affairs, ead.gov.pk. If you go on that website, there is a section on publications. In publication, you can find the monthly inflows data. That's the inflow. Outflow, you can find some data on the State Bank of Pakistan, but most of the repayment data is not public. So we get this data from our sources, which we try to keep confidential. We try to keep their documents confidential, so it is not, it doesn't go into the hands of the external players. Not in negative sense, because this data is very much sensitive. Even if you know that Pakistan will make a $1.3 billion commercial loan repayment, but you don't know the date. And if you know the date, there will be currency fluctuation around that date. So that's why the government of Pakistan keeps it secret and confidential.
Got it. There's a question from Amjad, and I think you've answered this when I actually asked this question to you, but just for clarity, he's mentioning that, can you tell us any measure which IMF asked us and the government did not execute? So is the failure of getting IMF program solely related to we not getting the money from China or US or UAE? Or were there certain measures which IMF said you should do and we did not do it?
At this point in time, the outstanding issue is the external finance. It is not like these three regional countries have not helped Pakistan. The list of the source of loans, potential loans that Pakistan shared with the IMF also included the World Bank, AIB, which is Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Geneva pledges, small amounts, and some foreign commercial loans. So those loans did not materialize, but the government didn't have the ability because of the weak credit ratings and the economic turmoils. That is the reason. Did Pakistan not implement any condition? I don't see right now, because no condition is outstanding. There are two issues that are outstanding at this point in time. One is the external financing requirements that include some of the external financing for the next fiscal year as well, which the IMF has denied. You might have read the story of in all the newspapers, including the Reuters. But the documents that I have, the documents are from the Ministry of Finance, that clearly state that this issue was discussed between Pakistan and the IMF on April 12th. It was further debated between the two sides, but IMF opted to deny it in a way that it didn't ask for. IMF reply was technical, that it didn't ask for the ninth review. The requirements for the ninth review remain unchanged, which IMF technically is correct. It's the $6 billion. But this additional $2 billion is not under the ninth review. It is beyond and post ninth review period and for the next financial year. That is one issue. And second issue is the IMF has demanded Pakistan to share the draft of the next fiscal year's budget. The government of Pakistan is not ready to do that. The reason being, the government believes, I think the government has a point here, the government believes that for the ninth review, there is no such requirement. If the IMF wants to see a budget and has its input in the budget, then it should club the 10th review with the 9th, give us more money, and then may have a say in the budget.
Got it. I got that feeling when I dealt with the government that they feel that the IMF is being unfair. So IMF actually doesn't have real intent of giving money. But like that's a different debate. I'll move to the next question. Somebody's asking that, you mentioned about debt restructuring. So domestic debt restructuring. But there's a lot of fear that banks will be hit very hard and their equities will be wiped out and the whole banking system could have a run if such a thing were to happen. Because you said you favored domestic debt restructuring, are you not cognizant of those risks, or do you think that those risks are overblown?
No, there are risks. One cannot deny the existence of the risk. It would be unwise to do that. Haircuts are common. Sorry to say, the banks have made a lot of easy money. On average, 60% of their balance sheets are invested in the government treasury. They are making easy money. I'm not blaming them. This is their business, and they also pay heavy taxes. I also acknowledge that. But when the times are difficult, they may also play a role. When we expect from China, Saudi Arabia, World Bank, ADB, and all other creditors to go for the debt restructuring and accept, and while keeping in mind our conditions, and the same thing also applies on our commercial banks. What is happening, the market operation, injections. My views on these issues are also clear. When the State of Pakistan amendment happened back in 2022, I was against this amendment of permanently closing this door, the state bank borrowing door. Not because I favor some kind of fiscal expansion or irrational spending by the government. My view was that there should be at least small window, having strict conditions like repaying this loan for 1 month to 2 months, because it would deny any kind of the possibility of exploitation in the hands of the commercial bank that we have seen in shape of how they participate in the auctions. But that didn't happen. Now what is happening that instead of directly lending to the money to the government, the money goes to the commercial banks, and the government pays a high interest on the same amount by 1 to 2%, and then get back. So the money is still being printed, but it comes through a different route.
Indeed. So just the final question from the audience, and then I'll ask a couple of questions. What are our friendly countries thinking? Is it just, are their demands primarily now related to politics, or are there some strategic calculus going around as well?
My interaction with the foreign diplomats is that these countries, and including the international financial institutions, they believe that Pakistan has developed the habit of remaining fiscally imprudent. Borrows, it spends, the government goes to elections, wins or loses elections, irrespective of that. So this has to change. So there's a very serious and strong realization in these countries, among the policy makers and the rulers of these countries, that Pakistan has to put its house in order. You might have heard the statements given by the Saudi's finance minister that was very much targeted towards Pakistan, and he was very much right. I mean, when this PDM government came into power, they had this business plan, what you may like to call it, that they would borrow $5 billion from Saudi Arabia and UAE, $5 billion from China, a big cake of $10 billion, then they will spend and go into elections and win the election, will come back. So people and countries then realize, look, what is happening? So this is the first thing. So the fault is not on their part. We have to bring our house in. And when there is such kind of serious situation, you don't afford to have a 90-member cabinet and a petrol subsidy plan and things like that, the spendings and all those things and the foreign trips. These things are being noticed. And when we meet these foreign diplomats, they do talk about these issues.
And do they have political preferences? Like, there was rumors in the past that when Nawaz Sharif went for Umrah, they said that, perhaps Saudi will support more if he returns. Is there any truth to these kind of news?
Look, that cannot be ruled out. The political ideologies, the personal relations of our politicians, the head of the political parties, they are very much known. Every political party has some kind of foreign backing. Some people say Khan Saab is against America. Others say, no, Americans are still supporting him and have been supporting him for a longer period. The affiliation and the relationship of Sharif family with the Gulf leaders. The Chinese have their own issues with Khan's party because of what they have done to the CPEC. So that cannot be ruled out. Yes, those things also matter. But more importantly, and the bigger thing than the relationships, let's assume I'm Saudi Arabia. And Pakistan is in a dire need of money this time. I give you $2 billion. Okay, fine. You avoid the default. The next government comes in. And this time it is not the PDM government, it is the PTI government. So again, the next prime minister, whosoever he or she is, he would take a flight on PF1 and go to Saudi Arabia and again back and take and seek $2 to $3 billion. So the political stability cycle is also important. So Chinese or any other country would prefer to have a stable government for a period of 5 years and do business with that instead of giving loan to a government which has only 3 months life, and then again they will have to deal with the new government. That also matters.
And Shahbaz, I want to ask this question. Many people have asked this, and we have discussed this, but I want to explicitly put this. And there are a couple of questions from Amjad on this point, that it seems as if IMF's demands are unrealistic, right? Like they're asking us to raise interest rates to real interest positive, which means like 30%, but he's saying that our current account is already in surplus. So why should we do that? And he's saying that Sri Lanka, they gave Sri Lanka the money, even with negative interest rates. And secondly, as you have discussed, that if the only gap is the external financing requirement, and if we need IMF program for getting more money from outside, then that's a circular error. That's a condition which is outside of our control, that how can we get money from outside? So does that mean that we will never get an IMF program? Because even in the next program, if we go to the program, they will again put such requirements which are unfeasible or outside of our control.
I would go back to July 2019 when we signed this IMF program. The design of the IMF program was overambitious, unrealistic. We knew from the very first day that this program is unimplementable. I might have written about that and spoken about it in my TV program, that this program is very much ambitious. The kind of conditions that have been agreed by the government of Pakistan were unrealistic. And that's why we saw the program getting derailed within 6 months in January 2020. Then it was again revived in March 2021, then again derailed, then again revived, and then again this is the fourth time it is derailed. So, but are these conditions unrealistic? Yes, I have said that these are unrealistic. But who agreed on these conditions? Who signed off these conditions? When you as a policymaker, irrespective you are how much desperately you needed the money, but you signed off. And you knew that the international environment is no more in favor of Pakistan, and you would not get any free lunch from the US State Department or the Treasury Department. Then why did you sign? So I would blame the government of Pakistan, not the IMF. IMF is simply saying that implement the conditions. The difference between this and the past is that earlier, if you don't implement the core conditions of increasing the net international reserves and achieving the primary budget deficit target, the Treasury would make a phone call and you would get a waiver. That point is missing. Other than that, it's the fault of the government of Pakistan.
Thank you, Shahbaz. This was extremely insightful. I learned a lot, and I'm sure so did the people on the call. And but these are extremely difficult times, and from what you have described is it's a checkmate on there are not many strategic options left, and I suppose it starts from political stability, because only once we have that and clarity on that, then everything opens up. But the time horizon we are talking about is very short, and in that, like when I just 2 days ago, I had a dinner with a friend from senior position in IMF, and he was quite clear that the only option which Pakistan has is that, he said, like, just like you said, that he said this government will end its tenure and DAR does not want to default, but the next government will come in, they won't have any other option but to send a letter requesting for restructuring. And the implication, the person I was talking to is very senior, so he was saying, essentially implying that his team, his colleagues are actually just waiting for that letter, and until that time they're just like waiting for Pakistan to send it that letter asking for restructuring, and then they'll get serious about engaging with Pakistan. So if that's the case, that has serious implication for financial markets. It has serious implication for exchange rate, serious implication for asset pricing. I suppose on the stock market side, the market is already pricing in, which is why stocks are trading at 2 times earnings multiples, much lower than the multiples on which Sri Lanka was trading after the default. So it's already priced in, but still high inflation is something which I think will be difficult. And hence your point about political stability and keeping your head at the right place and not losing, not panicking at times when things go, is perhaps the right call for all of us to do. Shahbaz, thank you so much for your time, and always a pleasure talking to you.
I hope it was useful. Thank you very much.
Very useful. Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.